10. Don Mr. Wizard Herbert, TV's original science guy. In the era predating Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye's television appearances, there existed a charismatic figure known as Don Mr. Wizard Herbert. While children in the 1950s tuned into shows like The Mickey Mouse Club and Adventures of Superman, Don Herbert introduced a groundbreaking program that defied the norms of that era. The show, titled Watch Mr. Wizard, unfolded within Herbert's own garage, where a young visitor would embark on a magical journey into the realms of matter and electricity, guided by Mr. Wizard himself. Mr. Wizard ingeniously merged entertainment and education for television audiences, becoming the pioneer in this unique combination. To captivate his young viewers, Herbert purposefully discarded the traditional lab coat and opted for a relatable appearance. Instead of using intricate tools or test tubes, he relied on everyday household items and common appliances to conduct his mesmerizing scientific experiments. Bill Nye vividly described the show in an interview with the Los Angeles Times, stating, "Mr. Wizard balanced eggs on their ends, wielded cryogenic bananas as hammers, and charted the behavior of shrinking gases approaching absolute zero." As one can imagine, Watch Mr. Wizard garnered immense popularity. Fan clubs sprouted across North America, attesting to the show's massive following. Unfortunately, NBC decided to cancel the program in 1965. However, Herbert made a triumphant return on Nickelodeon in 1983 and even appeared on the inaugural episode of The Late Show. It is worth noting that David Letterman himself was an avid fan during his childhood. Mr. Wizard's influence extended beyond his own time, inspiring future science communicators like Steve Spangler and Bill Nye the Science Guy. Before his passing at the age of 89, Herbert received the Science Advocate Award from the Council of Elementary Science International. Yet, above any accolade, the profound impact Mr. Wizard had on children in the United States, Mexico, and Canada remains his most significant legacy, forever transforming the landscape of educational television. 9. Kurt Chewing Lee, the first Asian American Marine officer. Back in 1946, Kurt Chewing Lee accomplished something extraordinary that etched his name in history books. He became the Marine Corps' first Asian American officer. However, there's so much more to his incredible journey than meets the eye. Born in 1926, Lee enlisted in the Marines in 1944. Initially, he was assigned the task of teaching Japanese, but when the Korean War erupted, he rose to the rank of first lieutenant and led his own machine gun platoon. Despite his position, Lee faced discrimination from some of his fellow soldiers who derogatorily labeled him a Chinese laundryman. Moreover, they questioned his allegiance, wondering whether he would be willing to fight against Chinese soldiers. It was a dilemma, with China having joined forces with North Korea in 1950. Would Lee prioritize his duty to his country or his ancestral homeland? On November 2, 1950, Lee responded to that question through his actions. Engaged in a fierce battle against North Korean forces, Lee's platoon suddenly found themselves outnumbered by a fresh wave of Chinese troops. After the gunfire ceased, the Americans were uncertain about the whereabouts of the Chinese soldiers. This is when Lee displayed remarkable courage and ventured alone into a treacherous no-man's land. He fired shots and threw grenades, hoping to reveal the enemy's position. Utilizing his Chinese heritage to his advantage, he called out to them in Mandarin, further bewildering the opposition. Although Lee sustained injuries during this audacious solo mission, his bravery enabled his platoon to locate and defeat the enemy forces. In recognition of his heroic actions, Lee was awarded the Navy Cross and advised to rest and recover. However, Lee was not the type to rest on his laurels. Despite his injured arm, still in a sling, he borrowed an army jeep and returned to the battlefield. Merely weeks later, he led his men through treacherous mountainous terrain, successfully rescuing 8,000 Marines who were on the brink of being captured by the Chinese forces. Subsequently, Lee's platoon found themselves facing heavy enemy fire, and in the midst of bullets flying everywhere, Lee fearlessly moved back and forth, assisting his comrades in finding shelter. Even though he ultimately suffered a machine gun blast, he swiftly recovered and resumed his duties during the Vietnam War. When Lee eventually retired in 1968, he left the Marines as a major. Fortunately, the rest of his life was relatively peaceful. In March 2014, at the ripe age of 88, he peacefully passed away, leaving behind a legacy of bravery and unwavering commitment to his country. 8. Max Patkin, the Clown Prince of Baseball. Baseball can be a bit boring, whether you like it or not. That's when you need a mascot like the San Diego Chicken or the Philly Fanatic to spice things up. But before these costumed characters showed up, there was Max Patkin, the Clown Prince of Baseball. During World War II, Max Patkin was a sailor stationed in Hawaii. One day, he found himself pitching in an Army-Navy exhibition game against the legendary Joe DiMaggio. But after Joe DiMaggio hit one of Patkin's balls out of the field, Max followed the famous hitter around the infield, imitating his unique run. The crowd loved it, and after the war was over, Patkin was hired to perform for the Cleveland Indians. Over the years, he also amused fans of the St. Louis Browns and countless minor league teams. Besides baseball games, he performed with names like Groucho Marx, Dick Van Dyke, and the Harlem Globetrotters. He even had a cameo in the Kevin Costner movie Bull Durham. So what made Patkin so popular? Well, he would stand behind players and mimic their moves. He would pretend to nap on top of the bases or dance to rock around the clock. With his hat sideways, he would tease spectators with insults like, "What a crowd. I had more people in my bed last night." Near the end of his show, Patkin would go to bat, crawl under the catcher's legs, run around the field, and finally get thrown out by the umpire. Patkin was especially famous for his geyser routine, a weird act where Patkin drank a glass of water and then sprayed an impressive amount of mist in the air. Sometimes, he would send up 30 jets after just one glass of water, after performing over 4,000 times, and missing only one game after his angry wife hit his head with a hammer. Patkin made his last appearance in Glens Falls, New York, in 1993, 6 years before he died at 79. 7. Emory Douglas, the Black Panther artist. In the fight against government oppression and the upliftment of African Americans, the Black Panthers emerged under the leadership of Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. However, they needed an effective means to spread their message and ignite a revolution. Thus, in 1967, they established their own newspaper. Yet, it was the remarkable illustrations within this publication that held true power. Emory Douglas, the official artist of the Black Panther Party, was the creative genius behind these iconic images. Douglas had a challenging upbringing, finding himself in and out of jail. At the age of 15, he was incarcerated for burglary, and it was during this time that he discovered his passion for graphic design while working in a prison print shop. After his release, he pursued his artistic talents further by studying commercial art at San Francisco City College. Combining his artistic prowess with his political beliefs, Douglas eventually crossed paths with Eldridge Cleaver and Huey Newton, prominent leaders of the Black Panther movement. Recognizing the potential impact of Douglas' artwork on the black community, he was appointed as the Minister of Culture. Working from a modest apartment, Douglas employed razor blades and press type to meticulously craft his thought-provoking collages and posters. However, his dedication to his craft was met with numerous challenges, primarily due to persistent harassment from the FBI. Douglas recounted instances where the federal agents made it exceedingly difficult to distribute the newspaper. He even suspected that they had attempted to ensnare him by sending an agent disguised as a potential art buyer. Despite the constant dangers he faced, Douglas persisted. At its peak, the newspaper reached an audience of 400,000 individuals, and his impactful artwork often found its way onto city walls and college campuses. His illustrations were bold and fearless, portraying images such as Nixon with a swastika on his forehead and a black woman holding an RPG. It was Douglas who popularized the use of the pig as a symbol of government corruption. Although the newspaper ceased publication in 1979, and the Black Panthers disbanded shortly thereafter, Douglas continued to create art. Until recently, he served as a graphic artist for the Sun Reporter, a renowned San Francisco publication. 6. William Temple Hornady, the man who saved the American bison. Long ago, trains journeying through the vast American prairie would frequently come to a halt for hours, disrupted by the majestic herds of bison dashing across the tracks. However, as hunters and settlers ventured westward, the American bison gradually started vanishing from the landscape. By 1886, their numbers had dwindled to a mere 300 remaining in the wild. It was during this critical time that William Temple Hornaday took decisive action, ensuring their preservation before it was too late. Unlike those who hunted for sport, Hornaday, a skilled taxidermist often referred to as the Leonardo da Vinci of his craft, had a different purpose in mind. Born in 1854, he possessed an unparalleled passion for turning his expeditions for exotic creatures into breathtaking works of art. Eventually, his expertise led him to become the chief taxidermist at the prestigious Smithsonian Institution. Hornaday firmly believed that taxidermy provided a means of safeguarding animals for future generations. He harbored particular concern for the bison, fearing their imminent extinction. Recognizing that the Smithsonian lacked specimens, he decided to preserve their memory by carefully stuffing a few of these magnificent creatures. In 1886, embarking on what he called his last buffalo hunt, Hornaday made his way to Montana. The experience proved to be arduous, but he persevered and collected 25 trophies, which he expertly preserved and proudly displayed to the world. While Hornaday's intentions were noble, his perspective underwent a remarkable transformation over time. By the early 1900s, he found himself at the forefront of the first-ever captive breeding program. Joining forces with President Theodore Roosevelt, Hornaday co-founded the American Bison Society in 1905. This organization bred captured bison in New York, transporting them westward by train to reintroduce them into the wild, thereby bolstering their dwindling population. Additionally, Hornaday played a pivotal role in establishing bison ranges in Montana and Kansas. His tireless efforts extended beyond bison conservation, as he advocated for crucial laws such as the Migratory Bird Act, authored a best-selling book in defense of all American animals, and founded the National Zoo to safeguard endangered species. Without Hornaday's dedicated contributions, the American bison might have faced extinction. However, it is important to acknowledge Hornaday's darker side. After assuming the directorship of the Bronx Zoo in 1896, he regrettably sanctioned the display of a Congolese man named Ota Benga as though he were a wild animal. This chapter in his legacy serves as a somber reminder of the complexities that can coexist within a person's life. In summary, the trains that once traversed the American prairie faced frequent interruptions due to the thundering herds of bison crossing their tracks. As the bison population declined, William Temple Hornaday, an esteemed taxidermist and preservationist, took action to ensure their survival. Through his passion for taxidermy, he sought to immortalize these majestic creatures and raise awareness of their plight. Hornaday's dedication extended beyond his taxidermy work, leading to the establishment of the American Bison Society and other significant conservation efforts. Despite his contributions, it is crucial to remember the flaws that marred his otherwise commendable achievements, exemplified by the regrettable display of Ota Benga. 5. Captain Edward Dwight, the would-be black astronaut. Back in 1983, history witnessed a groundbreaking event when Guyon Bluford Jr., an African-American, made his way into space. However, this extraordinary achievement might have unfolded differently had it not been for President John F. Kennedy's ill-fated trip to Dallas. Initially, Kennedy had envisioned a mission to the moon involving a trio consisting of a white man, an Asian man, and a black man. Captain Edward Dwight emerged as a potential candidate to fill that crucial third spot. Dwight, born in 1933 and raised near Kansas City, Kansas, developed a deep passion for aviation and aspired to become an Air Force pilot. Yet, his journey was bound to be arduous. Not only did he face the challenges associated with being an African American, but he also fell short of the Air Force's minimum height requirement, standing at a mere 163 centimeters, 5 feet 4 inches. Nevertheless, Dwight's determination led him to persuade authorities in Washington, D.C. to conduct pilot tests at his college. He excelled in the examination, leaving military officials in awe and eventually earning his place as a B-57 pilot. Many of Dwight's commanding officers held high hopes for his future, but everything took a sharp turn in 1961 when Kennedy extended him an invitation to join the space program. Although numerous individuals advised him to decline the offer to protect his career, it was his mother's encouragement that spurred him to embrace the opportunity. Thus, he arrived at Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California, prepared for the most momentous flight of his life. Initially, Dwight found himself in the limelight, gracing the covers of prominent magazines like Ebony and Jet. Fan mail and parades followed, celebrating his accomplishments. However, within the confines of Edwards, he encountered significant discrimination. His white peers, feeling imposed upon by the government's push to diversify the program, made life difficult for Dwight. Notably, renowned instructor Chuck Yeager allegedly instructed other candidates to ostracize Dwight, hoping to shatter his spirit. Despite the immense pressure, Dwight persevered. Tragically, his trajectory drastically changed after Kennedy's assassination, leading to his dismissal from the space program. To compound matters, he was assigned a role as the American liaison to the non-existent German space program. Defying orders, Dwight took matters into his own hands. He commandeered a jet, flew to Washington, D.C., and sought assistance from the Kennedy brothers. Regrettably, their hands were tied, and Dwight's frustration grew. Ultimately, in 1966, he made the difficult decision to leave the Air Force. Today, Dwight enjoys a successful career as an artist. Since 1974, he has crafted over 100 sculptures depicting renowned African American figures, including Frederick Douglass, Louis Armstrong, and Martin Luther King Jr. While his dream of reaching the moon may not have materialized, he undeniably left an indelible mark on Earth, achieving greatness in his own right. 4. Sidney Rittenberg, the American who worked for Mao. During World War II, Sidney Rittenberg was sent by the U.S. Army to Stanford University to study Chinese. Following that, he was dispatched to Asia to collaborate with the Chinese government. Although he developed a fondness for the country, Rittenberg was disheartened by the pervasive corruption that plagued both the Chinese and American systems. Nonetheless, he chose to remain in China after the war and worked for the United Nations. However, corruption continued to pervade his surroundings, with one notable exception, Mao Zedong. Rittenberg firmly believed that Mao and his comrades were devoted to practicing honest government. In 1946, driven by Mao's ideology, he made his way to Yan'an, the mountainous headquarters of the future dictator. Upon arriving at this stronghold, Rittenberg engaged in numerous discussions with Mao, who posed several inquiries about America. Inspired by Mao's convictions, Rittenberg became the first American to join the Chinese Communist Party. As Mao's guerrillas engaged in warfare with the nationalists in 1946, Rittenberg played a crucial role by producing radio propaganda to support the communist cause. On 2 occasions, he even served as Mao's interpreter, facilitating communication with American officials. The communists eventually seized control of China in 1949. However, due to suspicions that Rittenberg was a spy, Joseph Stalin of Russia pressured Mao into imprisoning him for 6 years in solitary confinement. Rittenberg vividly recollected, in an interview with The Atlantic, that the initial year was shrouded in complete darkness and marked by tremendous hardships. Nonetheless, following Stalin's demise and his subsequent release in 1955, Rittenberg once again embraced the revolutionary cause. Returning to the realm of broadcasting, he quickly became popular among the Chinese population, translating and disseminating propaganda through China Radio International. However, everything changed dramatically with the rise of the Radical Red Guard in 1966. Suspicion toward foreigners was widespread, and the Red Guard accused Rittenberg of counter-revolutionary activities without providing any substantial evidence. Consequently, he endured another decade of solitary confinement, while his Chinese wife was sent to a labor camp. Rittenberg was finally released after Mao's death. Astonishingly, despite his experiences, he still held steadfast to the chairman's vision. It was only when he became disillusioned with China's new leader, Deng Xiaoping, that he decided to leave the country. Returning to America, Rittenberg established a firm that facilitated business ventures in China for corporate clients such as Microsoft and CBS News. Today, Rittenberg openly acknowledges Mao's dictatorial and criminal nature. However, he also maintains the belief that, despite his imprisonment, Mao possessed well-intentioned heroism. 3. Ely Parker, the Native American general. Ely Parker stood apart from his contemporaries, the American generals of the 19th century, in a remarkable way. While they were predominantly white, Parker hailed from the Seneca tribe as a Native American. Born with the name Astronaut, he underwent a change after attending a Christian school during his childhood. By the age of 15, Parker had attained fluency in the English language and became the official translator for his tribe. At the tender age of 18, Parker found himself dining with President James Polk. Throughout the 1830s and 1840s, he tirelessly advocated against the encroachment of white interests seeking to appropriate land from the Tonawanda Reservation. Yet, his most significant turning point came when he crossed paths with Ulysses S. Grant, a former Army officer. The two men forged a deep friendship. In the 1860s, as Grant rose to become the Union Army's general, he appointed Parker as his military secretary. This appointment was indeed a stroke of good fortune for Parker, as others had been reluctant to involve him in the Civil War. However, under Grant's leadership, Parker actively participated in key battles such as Vicksburg and Chattanooga, even having the opportunity to meet President Abraham Lincoln. On one critical occasion, Parker astutely realized that Grant was riding directly into Confederate lines, enabling him to warn the general mere minutes before he would have been captured by the rebels. Arguably, Parker's most remarkable contribution was his drafting of the surrender documents that were later signed by Grant and Robert E. Lee at Appomattox. In a moment of historical significance, after Lee affixed his signature to the paper, he shook Parker's hand and remarked, "I'm glad to see one real American here." Parker humbly replied, "We are all Americans." On April 9, 1865, Parker made history by becoming the Union's sole Native American brigadier general. 4 years later, Grant appointed him as the first ever Native American Commissioner of Indian Affairs. Unfortunately, Parker faced substantial opposition and was unjustly accused of fraud after providing food to starving indigenous people. Although Congress exonerated him, Parker grew disenchanted with politics and departed from Washington, D.C. in 1871. Following a brief stint on Wall Street, Parker found employment as a clerk for the New York Police Department under Commissioner Teddy Roosevelt. When Parker passed away in 1895, his remains were returned to his people and laid to rest alongside his ancestors. 2. Newton Knight, the man who rebelled against the Confederacy. In 1861, Mississippi made the decision to secede from the Union due to its strong association with the institution of slavery. This presented a dilemma for Newton Knight, a humble farmer who did not own any slaves and strongly opposed the practice. He was unwilling to support slavery and felt no inclination to defend it. Additionally, Knight held disdain for the 20 Negro Law, which allowed those who owned 20 or more slaves to exempt themselves from participating in the war. This law exemplified the stark contrast between the rich and the poor, with the burden of fighting falling upon those without means. Although Knight risked execution if he refused to enlist, he eventually joined as an orderly. However, his loyalty was tested when Confederate soldiers raided his farm and stole his horses. Filled with rage, Knight deserted his regiment and embarked on a grueling 320-kilometer, 200 miles, journey back home. There, he was confronted with government corruption, widespread poverty, and failing crops. In 1863, he was arrested, purportedly tortured, and sent back to the front lines. As soon as he had the opportunity, Knight deserted once again, and over 100 of his fellow neighbors followed suit. When they returned to their homes in and around Jones County, they united with Knight to declare a war against the Confederacy. Under Knight's leadership, the Jones County Scouts, also known as the Knight Company, took refuge in nearby swamps and engaged in guerrilla warfare against the rebel forces. Tensions reached a boiling point in 1863 when Knight allegedly killed a Confederate major in his own bedroom. The following year, Newton supposedly sent a Declaration of Independence to General William T. Sherman, officially proclaiming the secession of the Free State of Jones from the Confederacy. In response, Confederate Colonel Robert Lowry and a force of 500 men were dispatched to crush the Knight Company. Utilizing savage dogs and brutal executions, Lowry did his utmost to eradicate the Jones County Scouts. Fortunately, the Southern Yankees endured the onslaught. When the Civil War finally came to an end, the Knight Company stood strong while the Confederacy crumbled. After the war, Knight was appointed a U.S. Marshal, becoming a staunch opponent of the Ku Klux Klan. He also spearheaded efforts to distribute food to impoverished Mississippians. Later, he scandalized his community by marrying an ex-slave named Rachel, who had been one of his closest allies during the war. Rachel had devised a mixture of red pepper and glass to defend against Lowry's attack dogs. Newton Knight passed away in 1922, but his legacy lives on in the 21st century, thanks to an upcoming biopic featuring Matthew McConaughey. 1. Barnett Davenport, America's first known mass murderer. Who holds the dubious distinction of being America's first acknowledged mass murderer? Throughout its history, the United States has sadly witnessed numerous instances of mass killings committed by individuals, excluding acts carried out by the government. Delving into the past, historian Michael John Cavallero reveals that Barnett Davenport, a Revolutionary War soldier who fought alongside George Washington and Benedict Arnold, claims this infamous title. However, it is important to note that Davenport, despite his involvement at Valley Forge, did not possess the qualities of a hero. In fact, he had deserted twice and had a criminal record for robbery and horse theft. Curiously, Davenport harbored a disturbing fascination with murder. Following his second desertion in 1780, the 20-year-old found employment under Caleb Mallory, a Connecticut farmer who operated a grist mill. With the arrival of Davenport, the Mallory household saw a new addition. Tragically, on February 3rd, under the cover of darkness, Davenport sneaked into Caleb's bedroom and mercilessly beat the elderly man, his wife, and their 8-year-old granddaughter to death using a swingle, a rifle, and a pestle. In a horrifying turn of events, he set the house ablaze, leading to the death of Caleb's 6- and 4-year-old grandsons. Fortunately, the children's mother escaped harm, as Davenport had managed to convince her to take a vacation just before the gruesome murders, presumably as a means to remove her from the scene. These chilling crimes were labeled by the newspapers as the most horrific murders ever committed in this country, or perhaps any other. In his confession, Davenport described the night as one filled with uncommon horror. It was only after authorities discovered him hiding in a nearby cave 6 days later that he confessed to his heinous acts. In an unfortunate twist, Davenport's brother, Nicholas, also faced the consequences. Initially mistaken for Barnett due to the false name provided upon arrival at the Mallory Mill, Nicholas was wrongfully believed to be an accomplice. As a result, he was sentenced to 40 lashes and life imprisonment. Meanwhile, Barnett endured 40 lashes and ultimately faced execution in May 1780. While Nicholas was released after 2 years, his ordeal did not end there. For failing to notify the authorities about his brother's desertion, he was ordered to spend the remainder of his life in the town of New Milford, Connecticut. There, Nicholas remained until his death at the age of 58. In summary, Barnett Davenport, a tarnished figure in American history, holds the distinction of being the nation's first known mass murderer. His dark deeds, committed during the Revolutionary War era, sent shockwaves through society and left an indelible mark on the records of infamy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for more content. Also, don't forget to share this video with your friends. We appreciate your support. Bye.